Today I'm going to talk about a book called A Roadside Picnic. And I read this one way too quickly, like way more quickly than you should ever read a book. I signed up, I decided I was going to do like a reading group on it, and then the deadline for the reading group, the day to actually like discuss the book, super duper snuck up on me, and I ended up reading it in like 2 days. I definitely should have given this book way more time and space than I did. It's a really interesting book. It's a sci-fi book, Russian sci-fi, and it's one of those books. It's interesting, right? It's similar to like Dracula in that some of the things in this book feel very stereotypical, feel very cliche because that's where the cliche comes from. So Roadside Picnic is the basis for the Stalker movie, and then after that the video games and all of the like ideas that have then filtered into popular culture. They all sort of originate in Roadside Picnic. And that on its own is really interesting. There's just so much worth saying about this book, and there's so much worth thinking about. And I am going to think about very little of it because I read it in like, between starting and finishing it, there were like fewer than 48 hours. So I don't have, unfortunately, I'm not going to give it the full treatment that it deserves. But yeah, it's the origin for a lot of interesting stuff in popular culture and in sci-fi, and in particular, it's the origin for like zones, right? Any sci-fi that has like a zone, and you go there, and it's really fucked up, and there's like, whoa, it's crazy stuff. Uh, the origin for that type of thinking is in Roadside Picnic, and so especially in the context of like creative work, and for me running tabletop role playing games, I feel like the Roadside Picnic has inspired me a lot because there's a lot of like creative works I've done and TTRPGs I've played in where there's like a zone. And so I feel like Roadside Picnic, if nothing else, is a really good place to learn how to make even zonier zones. Because the thing is, the cool thing about a zone in like a video game or in most novels is like the stuff, the thing that makes those zones so cool has absolutely been watered down from Roadside Picnic. It's not just that they're copying Roadside Picnic, it's that in many ways they've had to water down those zones. And I'll give you an example. So the Stalker video games have watered down the zone, right? The zone, I've never played the Stalker video games, but the zone, I imagine, could be getting something wrong, I guess, but the zone in Stalker video games, it's like this fucked up place where there's bad stuff happens and it's really dangerous. And, you don't want to go there. It's a dangerous place with some opportunities. But the reason that that's watered down is that in the context of a video game, you need to present a set of logical and predictable rules for a player to interact with and to master over time. And that's not how the zone works in Roadside Picnic. The zone is explicitly stated many, many times as a place where the rules change and where as soon as you think that you understand the zone comes and fucking bites you on the ass and it kills you. Uh, there's one sentence that kind of stuck with me that's like you could walk a path 100 times, and the 101st time you walk that path, it would something would be new and it would kill you. So that's the zone in Roadside Picnic, and in a very direct way, I think that players in video games need rules that are consistent, right? They need rules that are consistent, and I don't think that they would tolerate. I mean, I don't know, maybe they would, but two wolves, right? Wolf number one, players wouldn't tolerate that sort of instability. Wolf number two, it would be really hard, but I do think that you could create a video game where essentially the rules of the video game change and morph over time in a way that just has to be dealt with. Like a part of the process of mastering the game is understanding that you're always going to be a novice. I think this would be an immensely frustrating video game because part of what makes the zone so interesting in Roadside Picnic is that very, very simple activities become extremely difficult and extremely dangerous. And so I think in order to represent that aspect of the zone in a video game, you would have to create a video game whose rules change in such a way that the player is essentially always feels like they're in the tutorial, which I think would be really cool. But I think it would be sort of a niche experience that I'm not sure that people would really be into that. It certainly wouldn't be like a super duper popular video game that everybody plays. But yeah, I think that that would be. I think that's possible, but I think that it's a little bit harder to represent that type of uncertainty within the zone. The other thing is it's not just that the rules change, It's that even the framework under which you interpret what's happening in the zone, that framework itself is fundamentally flawed in a way that I think is would be very difficult to like do in a video game, right? Because in a video game, the rules could change over time, but there always would be rules, and there would be sort of an understanding that like as the rules change, we figure out, and it's that understanding of how to deal with this change. As soon as it's like settled, as soon as there's like something to understand, that is the point at which you're like sort of missing. You're watering down the zones from Roadside Picnic. Uh, the other, let's also talk about movies. So Stalker, a movie which I also haven't seen. I've seen about half of it, but that doesn't count. I think it also fails to represent the zoniness of the zone for sort of different reasons. You know, film audiences, they don't need a set of rules in the same way that video game audiences do, but they do to some extent need to understand what they're seeing, or they need to see what is happening. And many of the events in the zone are not really like visible in the way that you would want them to be, right? There's lots of times where the stalkers just through instinct, they just know that something is wrong. They walk into a situation and the hair on their neck just stands right the fuck up. And I think that that is not something that is so easy to represent in film. And I think that it's much easier to represent something being wrong, something that you can see and you're like, oh. Whereas I think it's harder to represent something just being wrong. I guess what I'm saying is in films, you have to actually show what you're showing, and it's much harder to not show what you're showing. It can be done in the same way that I think you can solve these problems for video games, but it makes them sort of like weird and not as audience friendly. I think you could solve those things for film as well. I don't know as much about film as I do about video games, so I don't have a lot of ideas about how you fix that. I suppose I should have watched Stalker all the way through after all. Maybe they solve some of those problems there. So anyway, that's the zone. Oh, and the thing that they're missing, by the way, I think is this broader, like, the reason that the zones in the Stalker games and movies are not quite as zony as the ones in Roadside Picnic is that I think what the zone is going for is to be an anomaly in this in a sense that goes beyond what we expect from that word. An anomaly in a typical sense. If I say the word anomaly, what we're expecting is some sort of event that is distinct from what we would expect, but that ultimately is comprehensible in some way, right? And that once we have explored the anomaly, we will have made it comprehensible. We'll understand what it is, what it's doing, the rules, blah blah. The zone is absolutely not like that. The zone is the zone is not like that, but it's also not completely divorced from that way of thinking, right? Here's the other thing that makes it sort of hard to translate the zone into other media, and the thing that I think has made it hard for even writers to just like write zones that are quite as zony as the one in Roadside Picnic is that it both is an area where scientific research can be conducted and also is an area in which the rules of scientific investigation and the most fundamental discoveries are found to be completely lacking in some way, right? So one of the ones, there's actually a long scientific discussion in which the words roadside picnic are actually said, right? The idea that gives the book its title comes from this scientific conversation where they're talking about the zone. And someone says, what if in the zone, through scientific investigation, we discover that the principle of causality is not as fixed as we thought it would be. And so essentially, I think that this is the way to understand the zone, right? If through scientific rationality, we discover a gap in causality. And the reason that that's such a big deal is that science is a technique for investigating chains of causality. That's all it is. It's a really, really powerful technique for investigating chains of causality. If I do this, what will happen? If this happens, what might have been the cause of that event? And so if scientific techniques discover that there are gaps in causality, it is exactly those gaps that demonstrate a lack of science to understand the world. And it also demonstrates, because scientific reasoning, to some extent, is just an extension of like the human reasoning that we evolved with, right? Like we're also very attuned to causality, which is what makes us so damn smart. Um, we're so attuned to causality, we invent some where sometimes none exists. Uh, and and uh, and so the issue is not that the zone is an area where science no longer applies, right? It is an area where science applies in a way that is self-defeating. The scientific method can be used in the zone to discover that the scientific method can't be used in the zone. But the issue here, it's like a full circle, right? It's a snake eating its own tail. The zone is non-scientific in a way that can be ascertained with science, and that presumably points to some sort of like higher science that is maybe in some way not based on causality. But what does that even fucking mean, right? So I think the thing, I think the reason that other zones are not quite this good is that that's hard to even think about, right? That's hard to even fit in your head, and that's what makes Roadside Picnic so good, is that it presents something that it knows is difficult for you to even fit in your head, and it makes it much more concrete than it otherwise would have been. And then you have a bunch of characters who come and they just like chit chat about it forever. And I think what most people do with a zone is they're like, this is a state of exception. This is an area where a different set of rules apply. But, you know, that's not what we're aiming for. We're aiming for an area where these same sets of rules are revealed to be false, I guess. I think it's hard to talk about on purpose, right? Like it's a system. It's not just a system where you take the rules and you go, no more rules. Those rules don't apply. You know, the rules of physics, we get to break them. It's more so that the rules of physics in this zone demonstrate themselves to be self-contradictory, right? It's something totally different than just like magic exists in this area. It's not that the rules are different, it's that the rules are violating the rules. Okay, I think you get the idea. I think by now you either get the idea or you simply are not going to get the idea. It's hard to state directly. You sort of have to dance around it, or at least I've never found a way to directly state what it is that Roadside Picnic is trying to put down here. Okay, so that's the zone. Love it. Love the zone. There's lots of discussion about what it is, what it's for, and what it does. And this discussion I would not take particularly seriously, except that the name of the novel comes from this discussion. And it, as a matter of fact, comes from one particular theory that is put forward in this discussion. So there are all of the typical things that you would expect. The zone is known to be extraterrestrial, it's known to come from aliens. It's some alien shit, right? And so there's a couple of theories. One is like, this is an attempt at contact the zone. We've discovered technologies in the zone that are supposed to uplift us. And then we've got the opposite. This is a point of contact that is meant to destroy us. This is some sort of communication. And then someone suggests a theory. Someone throws out a theory that honestly, I would ignore and I wouldn't take that seriously if not for the fact that it has the fucking title. It's where the title of the book comes from. And that theory is, what if this is just some trash that they threw out? What if it just isn't a form of communication? The idea is, imagine yourself as like some sort of bug, right? And these humans come along and they have a picnic at the side of the road and they throw out all their stuff. And then you as a bug, they leave and you as a bug come and you look at their stuff and it's completely incomprehensible to you. You know, so there's some gasoline spilled, there's some matches, there's some empty beer cans, whatever. And some of this stuff is maybe kind of useful to you, and others of it is very dangerous. And of course, you don't understand any of it. That's essentially the theory that is put forward by the zone, that these aliens are essentially having a little roadside picnic, and that they left all their shit in our planet, and that is what constitutes the zone. I quite like this attitude. I almost want to describe it as like Lovecraftian. It's similar. It's like Lovecraftian without the malice, right? Like in Lovecraft, there's a sort of there's an almost element of like, these creatures don't notice us, and when they do, they mean us harm. And in this sense, I feel that this view of what human civilization is almost even more pessimistic, in that it's like the the extraterrestrials, they maybe do notice us, but they don't even care enough to be like, you gross. They don't even care enough to hate us. Like, their only interaction with us is that they're essentially littering. You know, like, we are at best like a sea turtle with a six-pack ring around its neck. So I love that. I think that's absolutely awesome. There's another aspect of the zone which I think I think I somehow absorbed from osmosis as a teenager or something. I had this idea about from it. I guess I did read the book as a kid, so not osmosis. I just fucking read the book. But anyway, there's a this idea in the zone. It's called the golden orb or some shit like that. The golden ball. I don't remember. But there's this golden ball, and the idea is that it can grant you wishes, right? It grants human desires. And what people don't know about the golden ball is that it grants your desires, but it also requires human sacrifice, which is a very interesting clash with the previous roadside picnic idea because what would it even like, this is why I wouldn't take that theory so seriously if it wasn't for the fact that it's the theory that gives the book its name, right? Because if this golden orb thing grants human wishes and it requires human sacrifice, that has to be intentional in some way, right? Like that you wouldn't accidentally create an orb that grants like squirrel wishes and is sensitive to squirrel sacrifice and that doesn't work any other way, you know? Like it can't you can't sacrifice other lives, only squirrels. Like that very much seems like something you would have to design intentionally and place in an area in order to make it happen. Like I don't think you would get that on accident. Um, but it's interesting that nonetheless the book takes this theory really seriously. That somehow this thing that grants human wishes and that is responsive to human desire and all that stuff. Maybe it's an accident, you know. Maybe it's like the equivalent of an alien spark plug. Like it's totally supposed to be doing something completely different than what we're using it for. But anyway, so this is proved to be. This turns out to be real. This turns out to be real. There's a really fun character in this book. He's called the Vulture, and the reason he's called the Vulture is because many times people who go out stalking with him, they die and he doesn't. So he gets this reputation for being like, if you're in trouble, if you get into a tight spot, this dude will leave you the fuck behind. And it's discovered much later that it is not. It's not that he's been leaving people behind. It's that he's been fucking sacrificing their asses to the orb. Um, yeah, and it's interesting because one of the features of the orb is that it's discussed that the orb requires requires that what you ask for it needs to be sort of like true in your heart, which I think is really interesting because the vulture asks for stuff that is like really normal. You know, it's really normal guy type stuff. So stalkers tend to have really abnormal children, and the vulture asks to not have abnormal children. And I believe he has two children, and each of them are like separate wishes. Like I want a normal child, and I want another normal child, which sort of implies that there are like natural and relatively low limits on what the orb can do for you. Right? You sacrifice one human being, and you get, you know, like a normal thing that it would you could get. Right? Like some like a normal child, for instance. And so he gets some stuff that way. Uh, and then eventually the protagonist decides that he's gonna do it. He's gonna use the orb. And the person he decides to sacrifice is actually very feels very appropriate. He decides to sacrifice one of the vulture's children. So he sacrifices the vulture's child, and his expectation is that he's actually going to make a wish that very much mirrors the wish of the vulture, right? He has his own daughter, who is referred to in the book as the monkey. And oh, by the way, this is okay. It's time for some serious nerd shit. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to interpret this name, the monkey, in in the book because there's a really big gap, I would say, between calling a child the monkey and calling a child monkey. Like if you call a child a monkey, even if that you know it's a nickname, and even if that nickname is based on like them kind of looking like a fucking monkey, that still reads as like kind of cute, kind of nice, right? But if you call it your child the monkey, like that's so gross, you know? That's so fucking dehumanizing. And so the reason that this is puzzling to me is because, as some of you may know, Russian does not have articles. Russian is the original language of this novel, so I wasn't really sure how to interpret this. Like when you call someone monkey in Russian, is that like when you call your child a monkey in Russian? is that closer to saying calling them the monkey, or is that closer to calling them monkey? And I just it was difficult for me to figure out what the tone of that was supposed to be. I guess I can maybe kind of trust the translator that it's closer to the monkey, but I wanted to know for sure, and I didn't really have a way of finding out. Um, okay, anyway, so the protagonist wants to fix Monkey's health. What's interesting is it's not that he wants to make her normal, right? Like I guess that might be part of it, but the thing is that her health is getting worse and worse, and he just wants her to live, right? So he's very, I guess, he's nicer than the vulture in that sense. It's not that he has an ugly kid and he's like, I want her to not be so ugly. It's that he has a sick kid and he wants her to live. And so he gets into the zone and he starts kind of thinking about his if that's really his desire. And there's this implication. He says that the orb requires that your desires be like true in your heart, but he says that to a guy that he's about the fucking human sacrifice, so it could easily be a lie, right? Anyway, he leads this kid to the orb with the impression. It's clear that the kid thinks that he's going to get a wish, and he doesn't know about the whole human sacrifice thing, right? So he approaches the orb, and he hasn't told us what his wish is, right? He approaches the orb, and he starts saying his wish out loud, and it is completely utopian, right? It is I kind of want to say that what he wishes for is like utopian communism, but it's so much beyond that, right? It's like he wants to live in a completely post scarcity. He wants everything to be all right. He wants everyone to be happy. He wants everyone to get what they. He wants us all to like live together, and all of the utopia type stuff. He starts saying all this stuff, and then the orb picks him up and squeezes him like a fucking dishcloth that you're trying to wring out. So he dies, right? And so our protagonist gets his wish, and originally he was going to wish for the health of his daughter, and he sits down and he's like, "Fuck, man, damn, dude, I really just fucking killed that guy," and he rethinks his wish, right? He's like, "Is it really worth that guy's life just for my like kind of selfish wish?" And in the end, he decides that he wants a different wish, and what he wishes for is what he wishes for is just fuck it. What that kid said sounds pretty good, man. That's my wish. And then the book is over. So we don't really find out what happens next. I sort of wonder. There must be out there some sort of fan written Roadside Picnic 2, because it ends on a moment where we're about to discover something really important to the setting, right? Up until this point, this wish machine has only been used to achieve things that are relatively minor. But now this character has requested something that is not only big, but it's a logical, like on the face of it, kind of a logical contradiction. Like he wants everyone to get what they want, but like what about when people want two different things, right? And in the discussion the discussion group that I signed up for, we talked about the way in which this guy is sort of asking for a vision of like a future society that completely contradicts what human beings even are. I guess some people might argue there's some parallels to the Soviet Union, right? And I think I feel so stupid for not bringing that up. That this guy is expresses there's these two people, right? One who expresses a completely earnest hope in a utopian project, and another who expresses an equally earnest but sort of also like jaded and bitter hope in that same utopian project, right? Like I don't think that the guy, you get what I'm saying, right? Like the first guy is like completely earnest, completely like bushy-tailed, wide-eyed, and the other guy is like drag cigarette, fuck it, I guess that sounds good. But what they're hoping for is the same thing, right? And I do think there's some parallels to the attitudes that people took towards the Soviet Union, and I definitely think that is. God, I'm so surprised that we didn't think about that, didn't discuss it. Um, but yeah, it's a moment, like the book ends on a moment where presumably things are going to change, right? We're about to discover what does this wish orb do. Maybe one thing we talked about is maybe it's here so that someone can make a wish like that, which will lead to this like utter transformation of human beings in so that they can live in this type of society. And it's interesting because it's like essentially the only thing that the wish orb has done so far is like give the vulture two really hot kids, and I think he wishes for one other thing. Is it money? Is it wealth? I don't remember. So first of all, can it accomplish this kind of wish if it's put to the task of completely reforming society? Is that something that it's capable of doing? And in what way will it do that, right? Because the zone has been demonstrated to this point to be altering human DNA and changing people. Like, for one, the children of the stalkers. It also does crazy stuff like bring people back from the dead, right? So maybe this wish is going to transform people for the worse. Maybe this sort of invasion theory is really true, and that this wish is part of sort of unlocking that invasion that alters human beings in a way that makes them not human anymore, but potentially that like enables them to live in this utopian society. Or maybe society is about to just get like way better. Maybe there's no Roadside Picnic 2 because Roadside Picnic 2 is like, and then they all lived happily ever after, the end. So it leaves us off. It's almost like a poem, right? And that it leaves us off on a question rather than an answer. It asks something really really open ended, and then it's just gone. Okay, so yeah, I don't know if you have any zone thoughts, zone theories. If you think you know what happens after the plot of Roadside Picnic, if you think you have a pitch for what Roadside Picnic 2 would look like, I would absolutely love to hear them in the comments. So yeah, that's great. Okay, what is my review? My review is do not read this book in 2 days. Give it more than 2 days, please. Don't do what I did. Okay, that's it. Bye bye.